Good evening and welcome. Good evening, everyone. This is always the hardest time. I have to interrupt these wonderful conversations that you're having, and I have to kind of be a bully and say we're going to get going with the program, but hopefully you won't mind. I know you're really out here not to see me, but to see the speaker who's come out to talk. So the sooner I get done with my little talk, the sooner you can hear Dr. Boersma. Feel free to continue eating if you're not quite done. When you do finish, if you wouldn't mind bringing your plates over here, that way Chris can get those plates taken care of while the talk is going on. Thank you very much for being here tonight for what promises to be a great event. I'd like to thank Rusty Troth, Bruce McKever, and Alex Vance, who serve on the committee that organizes these events, and who helped to arrange for our speaker to be here tonight. It is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker. Dr. Gerald Boersma is Professor of Theology at Ave Maria University and Humboldt Fellow at the University of Tübingen. He is a systematic theologian whose writings focus especially on the thought of Augustine and Thomas Aquinas. He is author of Augustine's Early Theology of Image and numerous essays and journal articles and book chapters devoted to theology, philosophy, and literary criticism. And I believe he has a new book coming out this year with Cambridge University Press on the importance of connatural knowledge in the theology of Thomas Aquinas. You may recognize him if you attended our Lenten Quiet Day this past year. He gave a wonderful series of meditations on the Gospel of John, and everyone was so impressed that we decided to invite him back for our speaker series event. We've also had a series of forums on Sunday mornings about heaven, thinking a good deal about the heart's deepest longings and how they point us towards our true home. So I imagine there should be a lot of connections between that series and our talk tonight. There'll be time after Dr. Boersma's presentation for some Q&A, so don't forget to ask him all those difficult questions about Augustine or heaven or anything that you want that you were kind enough to spare me. The title of his talk is Beauty, Memory, and the Augustinian Search for God. Would you please join me in welcoming Dr. Boersma?
Well, good evening, everybody. It's such a joy to be here, to be back here. I had a wonderful experience last Lent being here, getting to know many of you. It's such a beautiful community, and hearing the choral evensong was just phenomenal. So thank you for your hospitality. Thank you for having me. Like Father Nicholas said, my name is Gerald Boersma, and I actually live in Ave Maria, about 45 minutes down the road, so not far away at all. And a big thank you to Father Nicholas for inviting me back here. I'm very grateful. So I was asked to speak a little bit this evening about St. Augustine, right? And I'm handing out, or Father Nicholas is putting out, a handout with some key quotes from the Confessions. My talk is entitled Memory, Beauty, and Sacramental Presence in Augustine. I'm just going to try to talk through some quotes that are on your handout. But maybe just before I get to the formal paper, I can give a few words of introduction about who Augustine was and kind of set up our conversation this evening. Well, who was Augustine? He was born in what's today Tunisia in 354. Right? He was born in what's called a Berber family, a family of North African descent, with a lot of Roman influence in the area. As a young man, Augustine showed himself particularly precocious, a great student. You can read all about that in the first books of the Confessions. And he went to the major metropolis of North Africa called Carthage. There he got his university degree and happened to fall in with an interesting group called the Manichaeans. And they lured him out of Africa up to Italy. And that's where he began his professional career as a rhetor and university professor. So Augustine was first in Rome for a few years teaching, and then he was in Milan. Milan was where the imperial court was at the time, and Augustine made all kinds of fascinating connections with well-connected people. He even had a chance to speak at the imperial court and give an audition for the emperor. But also very important for Augustine was who he met in Milan, the bishop there. The bishop was Ambrose. And Ambrose proved decisive in Augustine's conversion. He first went to the cathedral in Milan to hear how the bishop spoke. He was reported to be a profound rhetor. But soon Augustine was moved, not merely by how Ambrose spoke, but by what he was saying. Within a year, Augustine was baptized, along with his son, his brother, his dear friend Alypius, who came with him from Africa, all baptized in 386 by Ambrose. You can read the whole story in the Confessions. This is just a quick flyover. But what's very interesting is that very quickly, after his baptism, most people near to him pass away. His dear mother Monica, his son, Adeodatus, many of his close friends, like Nebridius, his father, and he finds himself alone in Italy, away from home. And he's searching, what do I do? Right? He has this new faith, he's been baptized, he wants to serve the church. And he decides to go back to Africa in 389. Crosses the Mediterranean again, and he spends the rest of his life, until 430, in North Africa, ministering to a vast geographical landscape. And it's really in Africa that Augustine's theological legacy is cemented. The reason that we read Augustine today is because of his enduring legacy cemented in North Africa. So there's three things in particular, I think, that make Augustine the figure he is, the reason we're still talking about him today. First is his theology of creation. His theology of creation. Augustine, in response to the Manichaeans, came to see that creation was decisive. That's where we encounter God. God radiates his beauty and presence from creation. Creation, he came to recognize, is God communicating himself sacramentally. See, the Manichaeans, those folks that Augustine tarried with for 9 long years, they held creation to be the kind of stuff, the detritus of a vengeful lower demiurge. It was the realm of decay, death, ugliness, and disease. The goal of the spiritual life for the Manichaeans was to escape the realm of matter to the pure realm of spirit. And so the first, we could say, 10 years of Augustine's life in North Africa was ruminating on a theology of creation. He wrote 5 commentaries on the first 2 chapters of Genesis, going over this again and again. So the goodness of creation is really something that's foundational to the Christian faith. And articulation of that comes from Augustine's response to the Manichaeans. The second decisive contribution of Augustine, at least to Western Christianity, is his theology of the church and her sacraments. And this came from Augustine's long debate with a group called the Donatists. The Donatists were an ancient group in North Africa who claimed that they alone were the true church. And only the true church was one in which the sacraments were given only to the Donatists. The background to the Donatists is kind of significant here. You see, what happened was in the early 3rd century, there was a great persecution in North Africa. And many of the Catholic leaders handed over the sacred objects to the authorities. They were called traditores. Traditores because they handed over the churches, the sacred vestments, the books. And after the dust settled, when the persecution ended, these betraying bishops, these traditores, they wanted their position back. They wanted to be readmitted. And some of the more stalwart, fierce folks who had withstood the persecution, they said, well, maybe you can come back, but you're going to have to be baptized again. And you certainly can't be a bishop anymore. Others said, no, let's let them be readmitted. They can go through a period of penance and purification, but we can't make them do baptism again because baptism is God's covenant to them. This went back and forth, and it became a major division in North Africa. So when Augustine returned from Italy to North Africa, he came to see this problem that was plaguing North Africa. Every town had a rival church, rival bishops, rival communities, families split apart, Donatist communities and Catholic communities. And this spread vociferously for over 200 years. And so Augustine spent a lot of his episcopate responding to Donatists, debating with them, writing to them, arguing with them, pleading with them. And it's in those interactions that he clarified the character of sacramental theology and his theology of the church. With respect to the sacraments, Augustine said, it's not dependent on the holiness of the minister, but on God, who communicates sacramental grace through the minister. That's decisive for all of us who have sacraments in our church. The third, very important contribution from Augustine comes from his long debate with a gentleman by the name of Pelagius. Pelagius was a roving Irishman. And when he heard about Augustine's theology of grace, that grace has to come before us, turn our will, orient us to God, that grace has to accompany us, so that any good we do is God working in us. And finally, grace has to sustain us to the very end, so that if we do something good, something truly worthy of supernatural reward, merit, that's not something for which we can say, I'll take my crown now. No, Augustine would say, merit is God crowning his own gifts. Isn't that nice? Merit is God crowning his own gifts. So the point for Augustine is that grace goes all the way through. Grace first converts, it accompanies, and it perfects. Well, as we know, that's very important, right? That way of understanding St. Paul's theology of grace. And Augustine had to think very critically about that, carefully about it, articulate it precisely because of the Pelagians. So this is kind of, 3,000 feet, well, maybe more, right? 30,000 feet. Right? Augustine's theology of creation, theology of the church, and theology of grace. Very decisive, right, for our understanding of the faith. So that's a bit about Augustine the theologian. But one thing that's less known about Augustine, and I think should be more known, is that Augustine was a mystic. What do you think of when you hear of a mystic or Christian mysticism? A desert father, yes. Saint Teresa, right, the Spanish mystics. Often, I think, we have a view of mystics, and the Desert Father is a good one here, as is St. Therese, of, well, someone who's very pious, right? Who's constantly thinking of the heavens, perhaps is elongated, rather gaunt, constantly reflecting on high, right? Augustine gives us a very different picture of a mystic. What's important for Augustine's notion of a mystic, and that's something I want to talk about today, is that they're thoroughly imbued with a sacramental vision. A sacramental vision. What is that? Well, we could say a sacramental vision is a way of perceiving the world around us, perceiving it as translucent to the divine presence, seeing God bursting and brimming in all that he's made. And that takes particular eyes of the heart to be able to discern this. So we could say a sacramental vision doesn't simply look at a palm tree or a dog or a person as that, a palm tree, a dog, a person, but views it as iconic. I think that's an important word here. Right? An icon is something that one sees through to a reality. There's some interesting work written contrasting an icon and an idol. Right? And I've come to think that it's not so much the object that's different, but the mode of perception. Right? An idol has a certain stultifying, limiting gaze. It says, this is all there is. There's a palm tree, there's nothing more to it. There's a person, nothing more to it. There's a certain idolatry to that. Whereas one can look at the same thing in an iconic way and ascend in, on, and through it. Right? And that's precisely what Augustine means by a sacramental vision. So I think a mystic has a certain way of looking at the world around us in a sacramental way. So I think there's three hallmarks of a mystic who sees the world in a sacramental way. First, it's a way of valuing the finite order, a way of looking at the world around us as penultimate. Right? Penultimate. That is to say, it's not the final object of our rest, where our heart can be at peace forever. Rather, it's meant to invite us beyond. So that invitation of the material order is how, especially a mystic, looks at the world around us. Secondly, right, a mystic, animated by a sacramental vision, looks at the world around as an invitation to ascend. Right? What Paul speaks about as the upward call of Christ Jesus really animates a mystic. Right? They see themselves on the move and on the move up. The world is for the mystic, we could say, a ladder, so that they ascend from the material to the immaterial, right? From the temporal to the eternal, from the finite to the infinite. This is also then how they look at creation, how they look at the incarnation, how they look at the sacraments. Right? In each case, we see God coming in a fleshly mode to the fleshly minded, to use a phrase from Augustine. Right? God comes in a fleshly mode to the fleshly minded to draw us up to himself. Augustine has another lovely phrase. He'll say that by the humanity of Christ, we're led to his divinity. Right? And that's kind of an architectonic way of thinking about God's sacramental economy. Right? The way in creation, in the incarnation, and in the sacraments, we're led by his humanity to his divinity. So this upward look is the second important feature of the mystic. The third very important feature that I think is a hallmark of the sacramental vision of the mystic is contemplation. Right? Contemplation is the key to the mystic. The mystic knows that his purpose in life, that which he was born for, that which ultimately will complete him, is the beatific vision. Right? Gazing on God and God's Trinitarian love for all eternity. And the mystic knows that he begins that journey already in this life. That the contemplation of beatitude starts here below. That we can already experience here below an incohate beatitude. And therefore, the mystic is particularly given to contemplation. Right? This way of seeing, a deep seeing. So, the sacramental vision is the hallmark of the mystic. It's especially a way of looking at the world around us as penultimate, as something on which we can ascend to things eternal. And finally, it's a way of looking, of contemplating God and his effects, and ultimately in glory. So that's a bit of staging for the paper I want to give. A bit of a long staging, I'm afraid. But I think it's important because what I want to take you through is some key texts in Confessions 10. Who's had a chance to read the Confessions? A good number of us. That's great. Well, I would strongly recommend it. Put it on your summer reading list to work through the 13 books of the Confessions. Oh, you couldn't have a better read. No, I'm not exaggerating when I say I don't think there's a more important book, apart from Scripture, than the Confessions. So I'm going to look at Confessions 10 today, where Augustine treats of memory. Memory and beauty. Memory and beauty are the key themes in this book. Memory and beauty are also two essential features of Augustine's theology. Both are privileged places of divine encounter for Augustine, our memory and beauty. In both cases, we experience something of eternity. And yet, for Augustine, both beauty and memory are experienced here in a way that's partial, that's incomplete. In both cases, we're left yearning for a fullness that we've just begun to taste. Memory and beauty, for Augustine, are signs that already contain part of the reality that they point to. Perhaps then we should say that memory and beauty are sacramental. So that's the claim, at least, that I want to unpack this evening, that memory and beauty are sacramental. We'll start with memory. Memory for Augustine is never simply a recollection of the past. In fact, memory has much more to do with the present than the past. Interestingly, it's precisely in Confessions 10, the book devoted to memory, that we witness Augustine's shift from the past tense in the previous 9 books to the present tense. He was recollecting God's work of grace in his life, and now we're taken in Book 10 in media res. But it's the book devoted to memory. Confessions 10 confronts an existential crisis. Is there a relation, asks Augustine, between who I was, who I am now, and who I will be? Right? In short, Augustine's asking an unsettling question about my being in time, about the continuity of our identities. Precious little of our physical selves is preserved over time. Physically, I bear very little resemblance to my 10-year-old self. It's said that our cellular makeup is almost completely reconstituted every 7 years. In Augustine's account, time stretches and strains, always threatening to pull apart the cohesion and unity of the soul. Augustine has a nice way of terming this. He calls it a distentio animae, a distension of the soul. And a distension is a stretching, a straining. The image is of the soul stretched out as if on a medieval torture rack. Time menaces to spill the soul's unity into 1,000 fragmented pieces. Memory preserves the person from the ravages of time's distentio. Memory proves key to the coherence and unity of the personal subject. For Augustine, memory is the loom around which the scattered self is woven into a unified subject. Because of memory, I'm not simply a body careening through time, pushed, prodded, pleasured by external stimuli. And this is what Augustine means when he calls memory the created image of eternity. That's a very profound notion. Right? Memory is the created image of eternity. Memory offers unity, stability, identity of self from the depredations of time. Memory gives real presence, maintains Augustine. So if eternity, God's eternity, is simple, stable unity of the divine presence, memory is its created counterpart. The self, past, present, and future, and everything that accrues to the self over a lifetime, experiences, knowledge, people, places, things, all find stability, presence, unity in memory. Memory gives another and a more enduring mode of presence to that which time snatches away. But I not only discover myself, all that I am, have known and experienced in memory, but there I also find God. The search for God does not demand an arduous climb to a far-off mountain or the solitude of the desert of the fathers Remember Augustine's famous line, "You are more near to me than I am to myself." The journey to discover the divine presence is one of interiority. Augustine writes, "You have dwelt in my memory ever since I learned to know you." End quote. He continues, "See how widely I have ranged, Lord, searching for you in memory. I have not found you outside of it." What does Augustine mean by claiming memory as the site of divine domicile? He is clear that he does not mean that God is an object contained in memory, nor is God a spiritual power of memory. He's emphatic that God transcends our created and often forgetful and unstable memory. To describe the memory as a place of divine encounter is in fact quite incorrect. After all, memory is a spiritual and immaterial power. It's the unifying center of our immaterial spirit. So traveling down memory lane is a journey of the spirit, and it's not God who goes down this lane, but we who approach or depart from God to the degree that we attend to his interior presence in our memory. In sum, memory is for Augustine the place of real presence, the place I discover the continuity, unity, and stability of self in God. It is a real presence, but because memory is the created image of eternity, it is also a partial presence. An image never tells the whole story. An image is not independent or self-contained. An image, you think of your reflection in a mirror, it's participatory. It's reflective of a more primordial source. And so memory, which is the ground of the image of God in us, acts more like a verb than a noun. Right? The image of God in us is not yet complete. We're on the journey. We're on the way. In the language of St. Paul, right? We are being conformed, reformed, transformed. So because memory is the created image of eternity, our experience of the divine presence of God in memory is a sacramental presence. Sacramental because we experience something of the unity, stability, and presence to which it points. Remember St. Paul, now we know in part. All right, now I want to turn to the second half of this analysis, which is on beauty. All right, beauty and sacramental presence. Now, few theologians have written as enthusiastically about beauty as Augustine. It's above all the power of beauty to move us that captivates Augustine. And he asks, what gives beauty this dynamism? In Confessions 10, he explains that there's something of God's presence in beauty that gives it this driving force. Beauty is sacramental. It draws us up to the divinity that it already contains. And so the overwhelming question becomes, what do you love? What beauty draws you out of yourself and into the object of your affection? What transfixes your gaze? And here I'll share with you, I think, the first quote on your handout, where Augustine is inquiring in the world around him. What is the object of my love? I asked the earth, and it said, it is not I. I asked all that is in it, they made the same confession. I asked the sea and deeps, the living creatures that creep, and they responded, we are not your God. Look beyond us. I asked the breezes which blow, and the entire air with its inhabitants said, Anaximenes was mistaken. I am not God. I asked heaven, sun, moon, and stars. They said, nor are we the God whom you seek. And I said to all these things in my external environment, tell me of my God whom you are not, Tell me something about him. Excuse me. And with great voice, they cried out, He made us. My question was the attention I gave to them, and the response was their beauty. Excuse me. In this quotation, Augustine is knocking at the door, right? Inquiring at the door of each of the four elements. Remember those ancient building blocks that the ancients held to be the constitutive parts of all material things. None of these elements is found to be a suitable object for his love. Rather, each invites him further up and further in. He ascends from earth to water, and from water to air, and finally, from air to the fiery celestial bodies. Each has a resplendent beauty. Each calls out to Augustine, but none show themselves a fitting object in which his love can rest. None of them are this final beauty he's searching for. Rather, the beauty that shines in and through them beckons beyond, impels him to move, invites him to continue his upward journey. Well, this is a sacramental vision that Augustine's painting for us in this quote. It's a sacramental vision. As you work through Confessions 10, or at least as I did, I was struck inasmuch as I don't think there's any text, at least in Augustine's corpus, that approaches the ecstatic, polyamorous celebration of beauty in all its variegated forms. Augustine writes, Heaven and earth and everything in them and all sides evoke my admiration, praise, and love of God. End quote. So God is loved in the beauty of his creation. He is seen in his creatures. The beauty bursting and brimming in all that's fair radiates the divine presence. Creation's beauty proclaims God to be radically immanent to his works. It's an important word, right? This nearness and proximity. And radical in the literal sense of being the root and source of creation's splendor. At the same time, God is not the beauty of his creation. He is wholly other, transcendent. Creation's beauty is not coterminous with God, but a signpost, again, inviting us further up and further in. The paradoxical truth of divine beauty as both in creatures and wholly other than creatures is wonderfully expressed by Augustine in this next quote that's on your handout. He asks, But when I love you, what do I love? It is not physical beauty, nor temporal glory, nor the brightness of light dear to earthly eyes, nor the sweet melodies of all kinds of songs, nor the gentle odor of flowers and ointments and perfumes, nor manna or honey, nor limbs welcoming the embraces of the flesh. It is not these I love when I love my God. Yet there is a light I love, and a food, and a kind of embrace when I love my God. A light, a voice, odor, food, embrace of my inner man, where my soul is floodlit by light, which space cannot contain, where there is a sound that time cannot cease, where there is a perfume which no breeze disperses, where there is a taste for food no amount of eating can lessen, and where there is a bond of union that no satiety can part. This is what I love when I love my God. Isn't that a marvelous quote? Augustine contends that the beauty of creatures is nothing less than the divine presence radiating through them. At the same time, God shares nothing of their existence. He is wholly distinct from them. This paradox, right, of God who is at once wholly immanent to to his creatures and at the same time wholly transcendent from them. This is the discourse of sacramental theology. To affirm that God is the beauty of his creation is not to suggest that he's grasped by the five physical senses. God is not perceived by corporeal eyes that drink in the world's many splendors. He's not heard rustling behind rhapsodic music that vibrates in the eardrums. There can be no gustatory experience of God, despite the power of smell and taste to evoke a whole world. Hands, limbs, lips that intimately envelop another never touch God. But to say that God is not physically seen, heard, smelled, touched, or tasted is also not a simple negation. Somehow, God's presence is discerned in such sensual experiences. And this is because such experiences are proper to persons. Spiritual beings have the capacity to take in physical beauty, to experience it, and to receive it spiritually. They alone can understand beauty in the sense of standing under, perceiving what stands under beauty. Creatures endowed with spiritual intelligence can receive spiritual forms of material realities. And it is in this way that God can be seen, heard, touched, smelled, and tasted. Spiritual beings, affirms Augustine, can drink in the light, voice, odor, food, and embrace of God. So the encounter with beauty is a spiritual delight in material existence. The human capacity to enjoy beauty is another way of saying that we are sacramental beings. Imagine a majestic morning on an alpine meadow. The sun begins its dance on the hills. Birds are singing. The grass, still damp to the touch, rustles in the wind. The goat, grazing in the meadow, can hear, smell, taste, and touch this reality. But the goat cannot take it in. Only a person can experience it as beautiful. Only a person can give it spiritual attention. Very important word for Augustine, right? Attention, the intensio of the will. Only a person can fix the interior eyes of his heart on the material order and take it in. Take in its beauty with contemplative delight. So to say that the human person has the capacity to receive this world sacramentally, well, easier said than done. Right? Cultivating this sacramental vision is a spiritual practice that does not come easily. It demands, again, spiritual attention. And we are prone to distraction, forgetfulness, prone to tune out the interior reverberations of eternal beauty. Fallen human nature is prone to be riveted by external beauty, failing to discern its sacramental summons to ascend. And Augustine expresses this poetically in one of the most famous quotes of his corpus. It's on your handout. Late have I loved you, beauty so ancient and so new. Late have I loved you. Lo, you were within, but I outside, seeking there for you. And upon the shapely things you have made, I rushed headlong, misshapen. You were with me, you are with me, but I was not with you. They held me back far from you, those things which would have no being, were they not in you. You called, shouted, broke through my deafness. You flared, blazed, banished my blindness. You lavished your fragrance. I gasped, and now I have pant for you. I tasted you, I hunger and thirst. You touched me, and I burned for your peace. Beauty, when rightly beheld, invites us to ascend from the material to the immaterial, from the finite to the infinite. And for this reason, the experience of beauty, at least here below, does not so much evoke pleasure as longing. Right? The encounter with the beautiful stirs a primordial memory deep within. In memory, we recognize, right? Literally, we know again, an almost forgotten and transcendent place, a place that we have been before, a place from whence we come. Augustine here points to the common experience, at least for me, of losing something, right? And you're searching about. Upon finding it, we have a moment of recognition. We exclaim, says Augustine, "That's it." He writes, "We could not recognize it if we did not remember it." End quote. It's as if our memory, he says, retains a part of what was missing. And upon discovering the missing item, we compare it with the part held in memory. I put this quotation on your handout. Can it be that the part which was retained gave a clue to the part which had vanished? Because memory was aware that some item was absent from the full complement it was used to turn over, and feeling itself to be lame and lacking something that normally belonged to it, demanded that the missing element be restored. Well, this ordinary experience of losing something and comparing it with what's in your mind, right? That, says Augustine, is how sacraments work. That's also how beauty works. By giving us part of the joy and beauty of God's life here below, they serve to arouse memory and arouse in our memory longing for the joy and beauty of God's life that we are missing. The experience of loss while retaining part of what was lost in memory, and thirdly, the joy of recognition. This, for Augustine, is a parable of the drama of the human condition. We wander east of Eden, acutely aware that we are lame and lacking. We have lost happiness, fullness, perfect communion with the divine life. However, we must still, he says, possess it in some fashion. Otherwise, these words, happiness, fullness, communion, they'd have no intelligibility. Where then, Augustine asks, where do we possess that part? We retain the part in memory, he says. And moments of beauty here below cause us to throb with yearning and nostalgia. He writes, it's also on your handout, in some mysterious way, they must know it. Therefore, and hence truly possess it through some kind of cognizance. What I am attempting to find out is whether this resides in memory. Because if it does, that must mean that we were happy once upon a time. That's nice, right? We were happy once upon a time. Beauty works by awakening memory. Beauty reminds us of the once upon a time of our nature. Beauty is recognized memory. The encounter with beauty stirs up a primordial memory of a fullness we once possessed. And for this reason, the experience of beauty here below tends to be nostalgic. It leaves us longing for a more complete and whole beauty, for a beauty we once enjoyed, but now experience fleetingly and in part. C.S. Lewis expressed this wonderfully. This is the last quote on your handout. The books, or the music, in which we thought the beauty was located will betray us if we trust in them, trust to them. It was not in them. It only came through them. And what came through them was longing. These things, the beauty, the memory of our own past, are good images of what we really desire. But if they are mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols, breaking the hearts of their worshipers. For they are not the thing itself. They are only the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we have never yet visited. That's a marvelous quote, I think. In short, this is why beauty is sacramental. It awakens in us a longing for heaven. Indeed, it offers us a foretaste of heaven here below. Sacraments are, after all, provisional. We won't have them in heaven. They are food for the pilgrim, rations for soldiers on march. Sacraments keep us spiritually alive, but not sated. Indeed, they tend to have the opposite effect. They evoke in us a yet more ardent hunger for that which they contain. Beauty is a sacramental because it evokes in us what Augustine calls the memoria Dei, the memory of God. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Boersma, for a fascinating conversation. I'll open the floor. We have about 5 minutes for Q&A, so any questions that you might have for Dr. Boersma, I'll walk around with the microphone, and if you don't mind, stand right here. Yes.
Dr. Boersma, you said that beauty arises the memory of what we're yearning for. Is that due to the fact that we are created in the image of God, that memory exists?
I think that's a great way into that conversation, yes. I think the image of God in us is precisely, see, for Augustine, memory is the ground of the image of God, right? And an image, as I tried to say, is always reflective of a more primordial source. It's always secondary. It's always dependent, right? And so image, we as image of God, are on the move, are being refashioned, restored, transformed. And so this kind of gerundive, moving sense of image, of more and more becoming like Christ, is key to our upward journey. Right? And the reason that itinerary makes sense, and the reason we have this dynamism forward, is for the beauty of heaven. Right? And here, beauty below, experienced as a vestige, as an image, as a way of awakening that memory for us. Yeah, I think the doctrine of the image of God is very important here.
Let's see, one more over here.
First of all, thank you. That was a fantastic summary of Augustine, so thank you for that. 2 quick questions. When you use the word sacramental all throughout, the beauty sacramental in this way, this is sacramental, could you really quickly break that down to a definition? Do you mean sacred? Like what's a good working definition for when you say this is sacramental or that's sacramental?
Yeah, good. Well, sacraments contain the divine reality that they already point to. Right? So sacraments are in some sense signs, right? They point beyond, but they're not empty signs like a stop sign.
Right.
A stop sign, well, you know it means something, but doesn't contain anything. Right? Or if you see a sign of a deer, you'd be crazy to start swerving.
Right.
Because you know it's not a deer. It says there could be deers around here. These are different types of signs. Right? Sacraments are signs that already contain the reality they point to.
So if something's sacramental, it means
It contains something of the divine reality that it points to.
Perfect. Great. And then if memory is so key, have we been there before? And that's why the memory's there? Or is C.S. Lewis correct? It's a country we haven't visited. Where do you fall on that?
Excellent, yeah. Well, this is actually a very complicated question for Augustine. Right? Because Augustine, as a younger man, he was a Platonist. Right? And the Platonists say that way before, in our earliest times, we were up there in the cloud, in the forms with the One. And then we had this terrible declension. For them, the fall is what they call tolma, right? A falling from primordial bliss into this realm of unlikeness. And the journey for the Platonists is to return back this way. Well, of course, Augustine and Christians don't hold this, right? We believe that God created all things out of nothing, including the soul. We weren't in heaven once before and came down here. So what then can we mean by this sense of wanting to return, to go back home? How can we have a sense of nostalgia in memory? And so the way Augustine closes that circle is by saying it's our human nature that somehow recalls something of its pre-fallen bliss. Right? Now we live east of Eden, right? But we have a primordial longing, what we could say is a natural desire for the supernatural. Right? And that's implanted in us by God to draw us up to himself. And we're interesting creatures, right? All other creatures have a natural desire for a natural end. They got the resources to achieve their end. Right? The dog wants to be scratched and sit by the fire. Right? The sunflower wants to follow the sun all day. But we have a natural desire for the supernatural. Only God and his grace can give us what we long for. And that's that longing that we have for heaven, that nostalgia. Yeah.
One more question. We'll do one more. Thank you.
Thanks, Father Nicholas. Thank you, Dr. Boersma. That was very interesting. So what you said makes more sense to me in the contemplation of beauty in natural wonders, the sun, the moon, nature. Where I struggle a bit is a lot of things that I find beautiful, like the music tonight, or paintings, or works of art, or Bernini's St. Teresa, are works by man. So what part does the artist and the creative spirit play in this Augustinian theology?
Oh, that's good, yeah. Yeah, we really need to develop, right, a theology of beauty to articulate this well. One way of kind of entering into the conversation is to say that art is an imitation of nature. That doesn't mean it has to, be a correspondence, but our soul is attuned to beautiful things. We want beautiful things. They resonate with us. And so I think even the material arts and the creative arts, the musical arts, are always, in some sense, derivative, reflective of our more primordial experience with God's art and nature. Yeah, that's where I'd start that conversation. Yeah.
So all of these are very big questions, so we appreciate your time with us tonight. Thank you so much for coming out. And for being willing to field some big questions. Thank you so much. Let me close with a quick word of prayer, and then I'll send you on your way. Gracious Father, we give you thanks for this beautiful night and for the opportunity to draw closer to you through intellectual inquiry, through beauty in nature, beauty in music and art. And we pray that you would satisfy that deep longing which you have placed in our hearts by bringing us closer to you each day of our lives and ultimately in eternity. For we ask this in Christ's name. Amen.